Welcome to the Legal Leaders Podcast with Ali Rock. Ian Poirier is the Associate General Counsel at Toyota Research Institute, where he works at the intersection of autonomous vehicles, robotics, and safety. Ian has built a highly successful in-house legal career, working at fast-growing companies and startups like Lyft and the Wikimedia Foundation, with much of his work focused on autonomous vehicle regulation, safety, and policy. Throughout our conversation, Ian reflects on how mastering the fundamentals, taking on responsibility early, and operating in environments without formal process or training played a major role in shaping his career. We hope you enjoy the episode. All right, Ian, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
Cool. Before we dive into things, I noticed the Supra in your LinkedIn header that was featured in the autonomous drifting video. So I got to ask, are you into cars by chance?
I have a complicated relationship with cars, but yes, I like cars a lot. Although currently I'm driving a Sienna minivan and I have a Prius on the way. So two real exciting cars, but
yeah,
get a chance to drive a Prius and to drive a Supra around Vermont a bit earlier this year. And that was a different experience.
I actually read that the new Prius was faster than the first gen BRZ on the track. So it's a good car.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's a car with a lot of history at Toyota, and I felt like I had not yet checked that box by not being a Prius guy. So combination van Prius.
Nice. Well, it's great to have you on. I'd love to talk about your career. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about what you're currently doing at Toyota Research Institute.
Sure. I'm Associate General Counsel at TRI, which is how I'll refer to it if you don't mind. And I've been here since about 2017, although I've gone to some other Toyota groups and come back in the middle. But my role is own a couple areas, but also be legal generalist. So there's about 4 of us on the legal team. I am responsible for safety, policy, particularly external policy, and a lot of our general contracting and product counseling that relates to a lot of our driving projects. So we have a lot of different research projects, a lot of university engagements, and we have different people that focus on different areas, but those are where I spend most of my time. But we're very small, so there's quite a bit of overlap.
And are you also managing the venture capital arm?
Not currently. So that's something that I had been doing earlier. And then there was a gap that opened up there more recently where they needed a general counsel to fill in for a while. So since I had some experience there, I was able to hop in and fill that seat for a while. But that's another thing that TRI does. We have our own in-house corporate VC firm with about 100 portfolios in 100 companies in its portfolio now, a little under $1 billion assets under management. And it does the same thing that TRI does, try to figure out what's next and be a part of it. So that was really good experience and exciting, but I was able to hand that off to a new team of lawyers.
Nice. Yeah. So been there since 2017. That's amazing. Let's take it back. So I know you went to Williams and then you went to UC Hastings, AKA UCSF Law. So I'm curious, like, what were you pretty much went in-house almost immediately. So what were you thinking about doing when you were in law school?
When I was in law school, I was trying to keep my doors open, but my focus was on antitrust, strangely enough. I really wanted to work plaintiff side antitrust, hopefully for the government. And that's where I did my externship with the DOJ here in San Francisco. I worked on what was at the time the biggest criminal price fixing case in history, AUO Optronics. And that was 12 different screen manufacturers setting prices. And that was a really great experience and really my only courtroom experience that I've had up to that point and really since. And the downside was I was effectively conflicted out of the civil side of the case. So once there's the big criminal case, the civil firms tend to follow on. on the same fact pattern. And that effectively nuked my chances of going that route, unfortunately. So ended up going directly in-house, which was not the plan. I assumed, like most people in law school that were kind of eyeing in-house, that I would go to a firm for a while and then transfer. But I had the opportunity to go straight to Wikimedia based on I'd applied for an internship there earlier, but wasn't able to take it for timing reasons. And they just followed up after I had graduated and said, "Why don't you come here on a contract basis instead?" So that was a bit of a leap of faith, because I think going straight in-house is a bit risky, but it really worked out, and I'm glad I went that way. I think it's becoming less risky as I think companies realize the benefits, but at the time it felt like a big risk.
Yeah, can you maybe speak more on that? Like, would you hire someone straight out of law school? And if so, what do you look for?
Yeah, I've done a number of times. Generally, we're looking for the kind of the unquantifiable common sense, and sometimes that is tied to work experience outside of the legal world. I really like it when people have had really menial jobs. I think having some type of atypical, not just straight line legal work is useful. But we're looking at somebody that can be taken from their context and put into a business and able to operate with those various stakeholders and communicate well and have a practical approach. And sometimes it's hard to assess from a resume, but that's one of the useful things we looked for.
Yeah, it does seem like you said, more companies are looking to hire folks straight out of law school. So there's a bit of a shift there. Cool. And so you were at Wikimedia for, I believe, about less than a year, and then you
Right.
went to Yapstone. And so why did you switch companies?
I really like Wikimedia. It was a great place to be a young lawyer, and a lot of cutting edge, like exciting, internet freedom, open source software stuff going on. But my boss at the time left, and I had the opportunity to follow her and have more of a uh, long-term and generalist role. So uh, that took some consideration, but I think my time at Wikimedia was contract based, so it was a bit tenuous. And I at the time knew the value of a good boss, which has become a lot, even more apparent as I progressed in my career. And so I jumped at the opportunity to follow my boss to where she was going at Yapstone. And Yapstone was a really interesting role because I was a second lawyer there, handling a little bit of everything, but it was a lot of contracts all day, and being able to get really, really deep into the contracting process, which is not just a legal thing. Like contracts for a bunch of different audiences. I was often writing them for accounting, so they'd say like, "How do we bill for this?" I was writing it for sales, so they could put it in front of the customer, and having an approach to a contract that was really kind of an artifact for a lot of different audiences was different than what I was used to in law school. I think it's been very valuable since. And it was also my first experience doing really things that were not really a job of a lawyer at all. So at one point, this company, which is a payments processor, was having a lot of trouble with fraud. So any system that has money flowing through it will eventually have stolen credit cards going through it. And we were no business. I mean, we were no exception to that. So I was tasked with figure out how to stop this until we figure out how to build a team, work on this. And so I was working on anti-money laundering tools and seeing what the rest of the industry was doing, going to conferences, not things the lawyer typically does, but it was something where I was able to be put in front of a different problem and see how I could work against that. And that's been a theme throughout my career that kind of started there.
Yeah. I'm curious. So you were the second lawyer there. So I would assume there's not much training. Was it a pretty steep learning curve? And what should a young lawyer's mindset be when they're coming into a startup like this, where there's not a ton of process and procedure?
Yeah, effectively zero institutional training. which is why I mentioned earlier the value of having a good boss. So I knew going there that I wasn't going to be just left hung out to dry. And my boss, who was a very accomplished lawyer, would help me, learn the ropes. And I think the first time she handed me back, a contract template that I had drafted up based on, how I learned to do it previously, and it was just covered in red ink, like absolutely just drenched. And she clarified, like, look, this is because I've been doing this for a million years. It's not a indictment of your skills. Just take this for what it is, which is, education. And I think that was very true. And it would have been really tough without guidance from people that have been there before. So that is definitely a key thing to consider when thinking about these jobs, because relying on kind of a training program that may have been built 10 years ago and is out of date, like, I think you need to look at the people around you that are going to help you succeed. And that was crucial in that context.
Nice. That's awesome. Sounds like you had a great boss there. And then I saw you worked at Lyft. And so that's a pretty interesting transition. And you started doing regulatory work. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious about how the opportunity came about.
Quite in a similar manner. I was following the same boss around.
Really?
Which again is the theme. Find good people to work for and keep doing it. But I had been working for the payments company for a number of years, and it was a real education, but it was also becoming more of an like executing, and it became a time for me to make an adjustment based on like life circumstances and job circumstances. And the opportunity came to go to Lyft, which at the time felt quite risky because this was when there was about 300 people at Lyft, and they were only in a handful of markets.
Wow.
And they were going up against Uber. Wasn't totally clear what the regulatory structure was going to be. But I was brought in to help with the regulatory compliance function, which can mean different things to different people and at different companies. At Lyft, it meant we were the ones that went in and negotiated with the regulators after there was a law on the books and tried to come to an agreement on what the rules would be for operating a transportation network company. And then once we had those rules, build out the mechanisms internally for complying with them, and then go get yelled at in person when things broke. I think the synopsis for what the intent for the role was be the person that they call instead of just pulling your license, which is, I think, a good way of looking at regulatory work generally.
Did your contract experience translate to this type of work?
I think a lot of it was yes, is a short answer, because when you're looking at a regulation, you're looking at what does compliance look like operationally, and a lot of that is based on similar things that you'd find in a contract, like precisely what is this requiring of us, and how are we going to comply, and how does it impact what the company's trying to do strategically in terms of scaling. And this is something where we can use tools that we already have at our disposal. Is this going to require more of a bespoke solution? So that type of close reading and attention to language was certainly important. But there was much more of a human element as well, where it was a lot of relationship management and trying to build those connections so that we could launch across the country and keep our regulators happy. So it was kind of building on that existing skill set, but very much in the context of a lot of other stuff going on, a lot more operational concerns, hyper growth. So by the time I left, there was a couple thousand people at the company. We were all over North America. I think there were 40 people in legal, and when I had joined, there was, I want to say fewer than 10.
Wow.
So it was quite an adventure and a huge learning experience. And I think being in that type of hypergrowth is super valuable as a lawyer, because you can just, like, nobody's going to say, no, that's not your job, don't do it. It'll be like, sure, please. Which in a lot of cases can be really, really helpful, because if you take on something that nobody else wants to handle, and that things evolve where that's a big deal, suddenly that's valuable. And I think that's defined my career in ways that would have been impossible to predict at that point. But yeah, it was a real fun adventure, and I really enjoyed my time at Lyft.
Yeah, sounds rewarding. I want to ask, like, for folks that are graduating law school these days, how do you see like the future of regulatory work? Do you see it as a field that's just going to like increase exponentially with like AI and stuff like that?
It's a tricky question. I think regulatory work is not a monolith. It really depends on what's being regulated. AI is weird because it's being regulated at the tool level instead of like the behavior level, which is not usually how it works. I think when you're looking at all other regulations that are out there, basically, they're tied to like, how does this technology interact with public in a way that could impact safety or competition. But AI is being seen more of like this monolithic thing that needs to be addressed in a holistic way, which makes it tricky when you are developing a product that uses AI in some way, and you're getting pulled into this kind of this regulatory context sideways. A big theme that I'm always trying to drill into these conversations when we're talking with regulators about AI is like, AI is not one thing, and it's been a while for a long time. It's not new. So we need to be careful when we're talking about like this, the big scary scenarios that are usually tied to Gen AI. That there's AI in all your cars. We've been using basically more deterministic AI to do object and event detection, for years, and this keeps you safe. Like, this is how like a lot of anti-collision things are built in your car. So trying to reinforce that this is not when you're trying to regulate ChatGPT, but got to be careful of the scope of the regulation, because it's a lot broader just based on the way that they're approaching this problem. But that didn't really answer your question. I think
Sounds like it's growing because there's so many new things that are happening in the field, right?
I think regulation pops up when you have something new that is impacting people's lives in a way that demands a response, and those are really the two ingredients. And we have a ton of things that are new that are not impacting people's lives in a way that has safety implications, so they are unregulated. And I think finding that sweet spot is where there's going to be a lot of action on the regulatory space. But it definitely ebbs and flows even within a certain industry. So, I've been keeping a close eye on AV regulation, autonomous vehicles, because, my job. And there's definitely periods of extreme activity followed by a lot of quieter periods. And these things definitely move with the tides, politically or otherwise.
Yeah. I was going to ask about your experience with AV because, I mean, it looks like you've been working on stuff that's AV related for almost a decade now. And before I ask like a legal question, I'm curious about your personal opinion on AVs and their net benefit for humanity. Like, I know it's like a controversial sort of topic, but if you don't mind, I'm curious about your opinion on that.
Yeah, fair question. And I think that's something that I think every in-house lawyer needs to wrestle with. Can they stand behind what their company is doing kind of unambiguously? Because you got to do that when you're making the employment decision. And I feel that there's a pretty straight line between the capability of AV systems and ADAS systems, which are advanced driver assistant systems, which use a lot of the same underlying tech. There's a straight line between that and lives saved. Like fewer drunk drivers, fewer distracted drivers. Like this is not really in dispute. I think there's other trade-offs that we had to wrestle a lot with, like in the TNC space, but I think it's pretty clear to me that this can save lives, and if deployed correctly and responsibly, will make the world a better place. So I feel good about that. pretty unambiguously. Although I said earlier I had a complicated relationship with cars, and I love cars. I'm not glad at how frequently I'm required to get in one to get where I need to go. But I think that is a factor to consider. But I think overall, the math means this technology saves lives.
Are you calling a Waymo or a Uber slash Lyft these days?
uh, I am super impressed with Waymos. I've taken a couple of them, but I also still rely on Lyft quite a bit. I don't take a lot of Ubers.
That brand loyalty too.
Reasons.
Love to hear it. Cool. So it's really interesting how you sort of like you followed your boss. Like I feel like you see that a lot with law firms where one group goes to like another law firm, and you do hear stories about people following their bosses. So curious about the transition to TRI.
Yeah, at TRI. Well, I have to zoom back a bit about to the end of my time at Lyft, which is I had been responsible for managing the regulatory relationship in California and Nevada and a couple other markets. But
wow,
those were the areas in which we were launching Lyft's autonomous vehicle initiatives. So there was an AV partnership in Nevada with other people's vehicles, and there was our own internal development program in San Francisco or in California. And since I was the regulatory lawyer in those spaces, I became the de facto AV lawyer and helped get our testing permit up in California and getting us launched in Nevada and helping to get a couple of those laws in the books relating to AVs. So I was doing more and more AV work, but still was also responsible for a lot of the TNC portfolio, which became a bit untenable for me personally. I couldn't, devote adequate attention to either of those to do work up to my standards. So I had the opportunity to go to TRI and focus more exclusively on autonomous vehicles, and I took that chance. And it's been, I think, really interesting to focus really closely on that specific technology. And it's wild to hear you say I've been focusing on that for 10 years because it seems impossible at the time. Like one of the draws to the area when I was joining was like, I liked that there wasn't a very established area of law, at least, and people had not been hammering at it for their whole careers. So everybody was kind of coming in fresh. So it was a bit of a disconnect to hear, like, you've been doing it for 10 years, which I guess is true.
It's almost 2026.
Yeah.
Time is flying by. But TRI is really like one of those cool sort of companies that I feel like you hear about in Silicon Valley. Like they're doing super cutting edge work, especially with robotics and AV, but they keep kind of a low profile. But I've seen like some of the videos of the things that you guys work on, and it's really cool stuff. So are you still focused? Were you focused on AVs the whole time, or are you how did that transition or progress?
Initially, my almost sole focus was AVs. So we had about 60 vehicles operating in California and Michigan. If you're in the Bay Area, you might have seen them driving around like so many other AV companies with all the LiDARs and cameras. And my role was to basically own that from a legal and regulatory perspective. And that really morphed into also owning a lot of the safety. And a few years in, Toyota decided to put all of its AV initiatives under one roof in a new company. So shifted that test fleet, all the engineers, and a couple other newly acquired companies, including, perhaps ironically, Lyft's old AV program, and put them under one roof to have them consolidate development, move them a bit closer to product in terms of the development pipeline. And I followed that program to focus on basically rolling out a unified safety program because we suddenly had multiple different test fleets that were developed by different companies, piloted by differently trained drivers, all needing to operate to Toyota standards. And that was a difficult problem to address technically and culturally, which is why I was kind of pulled off what I was doing and sent with the driving team to handle that. So I worked on that for a couple of years within Woven, focusing exclusively on safety, pretty much, both operational and product safety, and then handed it off to a different team and returned to TRI about 2 years ago. So right now, we don't have the same fleet. We're doing more even earlier tip of the spear type research where we're taking, wild swings and seeing what connects. So that's why you see some of the things like the autonomous drifting demos, and we have some other stuff in the pipeline that I can't talk as much about, but they make for good videos.
Yeah, that was a pretty cool video. Just in my preliminary research, and I noticed you're obviously a speaker and panelist on AV topics. So just from a high level, from a legal perspective, what's the most controversial safety issue with AVs right now? Is it the liability thing? Who is at fault if an AV crashes?
I think it's a bit more general than that. And it might be helpful if I zoom out a bit again. Sorry to keep recontextualizing. But when we were starting to really focus on developing our AV capabilities and thinking about what deployment would look like, either in personally owned vehicles or in a fleet, doing level 4 taxi type stuff, there was a real void in the regulatory space. We didn't have a set of rules to build against. So when you're developing a car in the US, you have the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, FMVSS, and you have industry standards created by bodies like the SAE. And if you make a car that complies with all of that, you can be pretty confident that it's safe enough and that legally people are going to have a hard time arguing otherwise. And we didn't have that in the AV space. We had the same FMVSS standards, but they have nothing to do with driving the car. And we had certain state regulatory constructions around testing, like in California, and deployment, but nothing more generally. And I think to some companies that would be great, go nuts and we'll see what happens. But for us, that was a lot of uncertainty if we're going to be devoting a lot of resources towards building this technology. And it seemed like there was not a lot of guidance coming in the near term from the regulators. And it's a really tough problem. And I think there was a real need for the industry to approach this instead of telling NHTSA to fix it for us. So what we decided to do is get together with other OEMs like Ford and GM within the US and say, look, we make a ton of cars in the US. We are responsible players. If we can agree on how we're going to approach this issue as OEMs, publish that as best practices, invite others to do the same, I think that can help fill this void and become standards. So we spent a couple of years building that tent, publishing in this space. I think we published 12 best practices while we were involved. And, eventually a lot of more entities joined, including Waymo and Cruise and Stellantis and a lot of the European OEMs.
Tesla?
Tesla did not. And I think that helped fill the void. And we could say, as an industry, we agree, this is a responsible way to do it. We're all going to do it this way. This is, if not right, at least it's consensus because this is a real tricky problem. But one of the areas that was the thorniest and kind of the overwhelming theme was how safe is safe enough to deploy. This is an ongoing argument. That at least gave us the language to talk about metrics. And when you talk about safe, what does safe mean? And how do we measure it? And it's, I think what we publish in this space is informative. It's, I think, helps to provide some transparency and some clarity to the public and to regulators. But it remains a bit unsettled about how does that work in the real world. So that is definitely a tricky problem.
And it's ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. It kind of reminds me of like drawing a parallel with like Coinbase and all the crypto companies and how much they're trying to, I guess, do similar things where they're trying to like form these committees and show what's safe practice and what's not because there was like no laws around it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a real trade-off between having a lot of freedom to operate because of a lack of regulatory clarity and having comfort that it's not going to come back to bite you. And I think keeping a close eye on that dynamic is important.
It's really fascinating stuff. And then I noticed like now you have a few other, I guess, departments or factions that you manage and run. So I saw you have policy, robotics, safety, stuff like that. So was there a shift where you started taking on more responsibility when you became Associate General Counsel?
Uh, I'd say it was more the more you take on weird side projects, the more people are willing to give you responsibilities after that. So I think it was just an accumulation of side quests that brought me at this point. So um, I think right now the portfolio has definitely broadened, and my focus is a lot less laser focused on driving, but that's still a big part of the portfolio for sure. I alluded to earlier that there's a lot of interesting stuff happening, but because there's no like public safety angle, there's not really much regulatory involvement, and that's true with legal involvement too. So if there's not a big risk to address just based on where the technology is, I'm going to be less involved than things like robotics or driving. And I think that's true of a lot of stuff that TRI does, where it's like, wow, this is fascinating, potentially like world-changing stuff, but it's not ready for lawyers to bang their head against it yet. So I'm just going to like watch with admiration.
Yeah.
We have a couple of those projects going on.
There's not a lot of lawyers who, I assume, who are like at the forefront of these brand new technologies. So I feel like your skills are probably really in demand.
Yeah, I mean, to the extent I have a specialty, it's like new tech that has not yet been addressed, and they're just starting to enter that nether region where it's unclear where things are going to go. And I think that's particularly sensitive when it takes so long to develop a product. Like with cars, it takes 7 years to take an idea to deployment, and software changes some of that, but that not that much. So I think there's some to the extent that these regulatory skills are transferable, that's kind of where it is. It's telling different versions of similar stories with different technology to regulators.
Amazing. And so present day as a AGC of TRI, like what's your day-to-day look like? I imagine it's very different every day.
Yeah, I mean, that's the truth. It really varies, which is something that I really enjoy about the job. I'd say there's a couple different buckets of work. There's the stuff that needs to get done to keep the lights on, where you got your internal stakeholders like clamoring to get something done that is, you don't want to be a blocker. You want to keep the business moving forward. Those are things like contracts, managing disputes, employment issues.
Outside counsel?
Right. Yeah, we leverage them to the extent we need to. And then there's the other bucket of more proactive long-term projects that, as a lawyer, you're the one that has to say, I want to prioritize this and get it done because it's not something that other stakeholders within the company are going to be pushing for, but I think that it addresses a big risk, or it helps move the company forward, or it creates some other advantage. Ideally, you spend a lot of time on that as well, but the first bucket can get pretty big. And then there's the mystery third bucket, which is special projects that comes up from time to time, where it's actually, we'd prefer you to work on this for a while. So drop the other buckets. So what I'm working on any given day really depends on which areas I'm focusing on there, but I try to do a little bit of each.
And then last question on TRI, to the extent you're able to share, like what is some cool new technology, maybe EV or robotics related, that's going to come out of TRI here soon?
It's tough to say what's going to come out of it because what we're trying to do is really early stage stuff. If we get something that hits, we make sure that it gets bubbled up to different orgs within Toyota so they can make it into a product or spin it out as necessary. Lately, the thing that's hit for us has been like large behavior models in robotics. So this is something where we take similar architecture to large language models, but we're using behavior as the input and the output, and it allows us to train robotics, train robots to act, to learn skills much more quickly than they would under different frameworks. And that's been a big success that we're trying to build upon. And I think you'll probably be seeing more and more of that from other players as well, because we've open sourced quite a lot of that. But we're also doing a lot of work on the driving side with different approaches to architecture that will feed into ADAS systems and also AV capabilities. We're doing a lot of materials discovery that could impact batteries, psychological research tied to charging behavior and other things relating to customer preferences. So we're taking a lot of different approaches, and many of them will not work out, but that's how the math works. It's kind of almost a venture capital approach where you expect a lot of these things to not pan out, and that's fine. That's how it's designed.
It's really cool to see Toyota investing in this type of technology. It just sounds like a bunch of startups within Toyota.
Yeah, and I think it's top of mind for a lot of Toyota leadership because we were started as a loom company, like not very long ago. Like cars were not the original plan. And I think there's an acknowledgement that cars might not be the forever plan. So let's see what's next. And that's what we do.
Amazing, Ian. I guess final couple questions here, and just like looking back on your career, it sounds like it's like looking on some themes. You kind of took opportunity where it came up and took full advantage of it, and you kind of like drank from the fire hose. There were some roles where you like just had to train on the job. So I guess what's like a central theme that you'd look back on, or maybe advice you'd give to your younger self as he's graduating from UCSF Law?
I think for lawyers earlier in their career, it's really important to kind of focus on the foundational stuff. It's a real challenge to go into these companies and say, I want to work on the cool cutting edge stuff because you don't have the context and you don't have the the expertise in the company or the product that comes from just doing the boring stuff for a while. So every company, no matter how cool their product is, they have contracts to negotiate. They have employment issues to address. They have governance. They have IP. And that is so much of the work that needs to be done. And it's definitely the easiest way to get in. I think when I was joining Wikimedia for my first like post-school job, the sense I got was that there was a lot of people saying, I want to come in and help you work on your open source software and information freedom issues and net neutrality, like all these cutting edge, crazy, unique and exciting areas. But my approach was like, look, I know you got contracts. Let me do those. And once you're doing those things, it's a lot easier to say, well, as I've been doing these contracts, I've been learning a lot about the company and the product and the context, and other things get handed to you. And that's happened to me over and over and over again. Like I can probably draw a straight line between just taking a real, deciding to be like a subject matter expert in background checks and fingerprinting, like while I was at Lyft, so I could argue about fingerprinting with the taxi companies, to my AV career, just because things start piling up on top of that once you're the person that handles the thing that nobody else wanted to touch. So I think that's a theme where do not be afraid to dive into the thing that may seem a bit menial, because that's how you really build expertise and build trust with your colleagues, and everything else kind of builds on top of that.
Incredible. Sounds like you just never know, how you talked about the background checks, like how that could possibly relate to something you might be doing in the future. And it sounds like if when you're getting more responsibility, you're doing something right, which I guess as I'm saying that out loud seems obvious.
Well, I hope it's obvious.
Sweet. Well, thank you so much, Ian, for your time. Is there anything else that you want to leave sort of my audience, like mostly people who are in law school or graduating with before we end?
I'd say, like, when I was in law school, I feel like the paths to in-house was quite opaque, and it wasn't something that we were thinking about. I think, OCI and all the more established pipelines for other type of legal careers were they took up all the brain space for what your career could look like. And I think it's becoming more and more common and less risky to go in-house directly, and it's something that I found to be a tremendously satisfying and stimulating and rewarding career. So I'd really suggest that law students that aren't quite sure what comes next, that this can be a really appealing option. So consider in-house.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ian, for your time. Great learning about your career.
My pleasure.